Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Kaleh Raymond about creating a dynamic culture of people-centric performance management in organizations. Kaleh Raymond, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you.
It's so exciting to have the opportunity to talk with you today. I'm thrilled to be able to explore performance management with you. As we get things started off, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about Kaleh with my listeners. Kaleh has nearly 2 decades of experience collaborating with organizational leaders to support, align, and further corporate goals and workforce strategies. Her areas of expertise include HR strategy, talent management, organizational leadership development, performance management. Kaleh's expertise has been leveraged in many industries and organizations, from a combat zone to a corporate boardroom. She has done and seen it all. Her greatest joy, however, is helping organizations improve human connections and business metrics. Kaleh has a master's of business administration focused in HR, as well as an HR certification, the SPHR from the HR Certification Institute. She also holds certification in strategic workforce planning and leadership development and succession planning. What a great and interesting and diverse background that you bring to the table. And I'm just so thrilled to have the chance to talk with you.
Same here. Excited to connect and chat. I think the only thing, I'm saying the only thing, what's missing out of the bio is, the Forbes Coaches Council, which is how we are connected.
Yes, yeah. Forbes Coaches Council has been a great opportunity, and that's how we first got connected, and a great group of people.
It definitely is.
Excellent. Okay, well, to start things off, I just thought I would ask a kind of a broad question in terms of performance management. You tend to consult and support small businesses a lot. What are some of the types of issues you're seeing with their approach to performance management?
Yes, great question. So, there's 3 major issues that I tend to see. And the companies that I support, range from right around that 150 mark, probably upwards to about 600. That's kind of what my clients fall into. And what I'm seeing is that they know that performance management is needed, but they don't know why, right? It's kind of like, oh, it's what I've done at this other organization, and it's what people do, and, I have to have it in order to know how to pay out a bonus or how to pay out merit increases, right, depending on how they structured it and how they tied it to comp. And I think that that's an issue because, of course, when you don't understand the why behind a thing, either you take advantage of it, it's not done correctly, right, or you just, do it to check the box and to say, hey, there, it's done. It is complete. And anybody in any organization this day and time, I'm sure they've gone through a performance review or evaluation process, and that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like, that noise you might used to hear way back in the day when there were chalkboards, right, and the nails going across it. That's how it feels for a lot of team members, employees, and the leaders themselves walking through the evaluation process. So that's probably the first thing that I would say is they're doing something and they don't really understand the why behind it. They're doing it, they are moving through compliance, right? And not, compassion and really the motivation to help and understand the connections of performance management to the organization's overall objectives.
Yeah, and
So that's just one.
yeah, and it's a really complex issue. There's lots of challenges for sure. I really like how you term it though, in terms of the compliance-based approach versus perhaps other more people-centric development orientations. Um, and in fact, that's what I've seen as I've worked with organizations, is like so many people hate performance management. And they hate performance reviews, and they just hate everything about it.
They do. And you're using the right word. They hate it. They detest it. It's like, oh my God, again? Like, really, we're going to do this again?
But there's some legitimate reasons why they hate it. And that's often because the way it's implemented within many organizations, particularly within small businesses, is that it's not done effectively at all. And if it's not done effectively, it doesn't drive the types of outcomes. That's the whole purpose behind doing performance management.
And being intentional about it, right? Performance management is just the intentionality behind performance and understanding where an organization is going, and then where that division or that department is going, and then how the people, forgive me, I'm using some military vernacular, but where the people fall in line with those other two elements, right? And so, like, even what you shared is a perfect, segue into kind of that second approach or issues with the approach to performance management. All it is a necessary evil. And that's exactly how it's treated, which hence it becomes ineffective, and people hate it. They really, really detest it.
So with that in mind, so many organizations don't do it effectively. So many leaders hate it or detest it. So how do we break down that resistance? What do you do to help organizational leaders see the value in it and transform their performance management systems to something that will actually be beneficial and helpful to both employers and the organization, employees and the organization?
Yeah, certainly. So I always enjoy pulling on the lever of motives and preferences. If you seem to be pretty geeky about OD and HR and change management like me, but like Skinner and Carl Bonder is another thought leader in this area, right? Where there's 6 elements, right, to influence behavior or get desired results. And motives and preference seems to be the one that's really hard for any organization. That's what we're talking about, right? They hate it, they detest it, right? It's their preference, right? Or there's something somewhere in the culture, I like to call it cultural undercurrent, that's getting that response out of them, right? So we know it could be an expectations and feedback issue. It's probably not too much of a incentive or consequence issue, because the end result of most performance reviews is that carrot, is that 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, up to 6% increase. So in engaging with leaders, I really try to dig into their motives and preferences, and then also help them dig into their team members and their employees' motives and preferences, right? Reminding them behind the why of what we're doing. And then also, I love asking questions, right? Because you really get the insights into what people are thinking, but then also helping them to see that which is another issue that I see with performance management in organizations, is using this Me Too strategy, right? So generally it's ineffective because some of my HR peers, our OD peers, and practitioners, go from one company to another company, and what they're doing is saying, this is what we did here, or this is how we approached it here. And while it probably was great, or maybe it wasn't so great, wherever they came from, it's not true innovation that's happening, right? It's just a small shift in some process that someone learned from somewhere else. So I really try to dig into, what are we trying to accomplish here, right? Because really, you don't have to have performance management. Like, if you hate it that much and it doesn't matter, like, you don't have to have this formal process, right? We know that larger organizations like HP has done away with the formal rating, and they've really kind of shifted how they approach performance management. Any organization, any other leader can do the same. But again, kind of linking it back to, what are our objectives? What's our vision? What's our mission? And where are we headed? And ensure that however we manage performance, and however we have these consistent and timely performance conversations and the feedback loop, that it matches the culture, mission, and the vision. right? And that can look so many different ways, right?
Yeah, and I love everything you say there. And you add in the example, there are companies that have done away with kind of the traditional formal performance management or performance appraisal systems, but that doesn't mean that they don't do performance management. That just
Correct.
means they've transformed the old processes into something that's more real time with the
Yes,
feedback
and agile.
and agile. Absolutely.
Yes.
And
And
so
where the feeling is not they hate it, right? And it's more natural to the employee's experience, to the leader's experience, because I think the traditional thing about performance management is it's one time a year. So this is one conversation that we're going to have about what I've done over the last 364 or 65 days, depending on the year, right? This one time we're going to have this conversation, and the leader is going to attempt to sit down and write a narrative or give us a couple examples to substantiate some number. And the human flaw in that is I probably only remember what you've done for me lately. I forgot about January, or I forgot about last October, depending on the fiscal year, right? So, it's inherently flawed, which is also why we kind of hate it.
Yeah. And everyone can see through that. They can see through those flaws and the biases. Some just implicit, biases that we're not even aware of, but there's so many biases that can inform those types of ratings. And so having a more agile, real-time type of informal process can be very effective. And it's all about the feedback loops. It's all about the coaching and the mentoring. And we know that millennials and Gen Z workers want so much of that, that they want regular feedback. And sometimes I kind of chuckle when I hear, I sometimes will hear older leaders bemoan millennials and how high maintenance they are. And, there may be something to that to an extent, but largely millennials are basically asking for what we are teaching organizational leaders to do. They just have a heightened expectation that they should get regular feedback, which is what leaders should do.
Yes.
And so if I'm going to effectively lead people, I have to coach and mentor and provide feedback on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, I'm not really leading people, right?
No, you're not leading people, nor are you leading the performance, right? Or you can't appropriately speak to the performance, right? Because that's really what happens. Think about it in any phase of the employee life cycle. Think about onboarding, right? And whether that exists in some formal or informal way, but there is, you give an employee information and training and or content, and then you say, okay, you have it, right? Go ahead and do it. Go ahead and take care of it. And then there's no feedback. You don't know how well they took it in. You don't know how well they understood it, the quality of it, the quantity, if there are any performance metrics or standards that relates to that. And without being there in the moment, or at least pausing to say, hey, let's take 10, 15 minutes to talk about what that felt like, to talk about what questions you may have, to talk about where the process worked or didn't work, because in my performance improvement background, that's generally where I find the beautiful nuggets of improving a process, is in talking to people, and they'll say, well, yeah, I didn't do this, or I found out I don't do this anymore, and I do this instead. I'm like, tell me why, right? Because they found a better way, right? And again, if I'm not leading and if I'm not having those in the moment conversations or that feedback, to even say, oh, actually, that's great. I think I'm going to get the rest of the team to follow that same tip or process. Or I come in and say, yeah, well, while that's great and while that works for you, let me give you the method to our madness and why it's so important that you don't skip this step and you actually click this button in the system, because when you click this button, it has these other impacts to our other partners and the other people that are a part of this entire process. It's a trigger. So again, kind of getting small examples and details of the importance of, it's really important to be there to see the performance, observe it, and give that just in time, feedback. Sometimes I say this I have my lazy leaders. And at the end of the day, that may sound harsh, it may sound mean. Some leaders may be like, the nerve of her. But it's the truth, right? It's just you become a lazy leader and you want these human beings to become robots. And that's just not who they are. It's not who we are, and it's not who we're designed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm all about helping develop people-centric organizations with people-centric cultures and processes. And so much of this compliance-based performance management of the past is not people-centered. It's process-centered, and that's why people hate it. So if you were to give like one or two like key tips to anyone listening today who's running an organization or as a leader in an organization, what would be those one or two things they could do immediately to improve performance management?
Sure. The first thing is around communication and understanding that performance management is truly a conversation at its most foundational and simplistic state. You can do way more with micro conversations than you will with sitting down and taking, let's say the performance, review cycle process takes a total of 3 to 5 hours, right? When you wait until the end of that year to take care of it. So that would be really, if you do nothing else and you can help leaders and team members and people to understand that performance management is just a simple conversation, and more often than not, it's a coaching conversation. And that, when you're looking to improve performance and help your people and organization, that your leaders don't take the lazy route out and say, I'm going to give them training. Because there's a whole diatribe that I can go down the road around training, using training as a solution, but training is not always the solution. And this is from a training OD professional, right? Training solves probably 5% of your problems. And that's the rabbit out of the hat that most leaders want to use and leverage instead of just leveraging coaching, right? To sit there and say, hey, let me see what you did in executing this step or this process, and just watch and then say, oh, I see something you can do, right? And that's managing performance, right? And just because I took those 5 minutes to curb whether it's good or to applaud, to curb bad behavior or applaud good behavior, I'm going to get so many returns on that micro conversation, right? Or that small engagement with my team member. And that's really, you do that multiple times throughout the year, you have managed performance well. And then the only thing, the number 2 thing that I probably would say outside of that is taking time and space. Let the cadence be decided by the leader and the team member. But I would say probably minimum monthly, I would just talk about some wins, right? Talk about some wins that employee has had over that month or those weeks. And then, 1 or 2 things that they could do better. I know personally with my team, when I do their one-on-one, they can't tell me anything else. I don't want to hear about what's happening on the client. I don't want to hear about processes. The first thing that I want to hear is, tell me 2 to 3 things you've done that you just killed it, you nailed it, it went so well, you're proud of yourself since the last time we spoke. And if they give me 2 things, then I only want to hear 1 thing that didn't go so well. But we'll talk about that. And I coach to both, to the good things and to the bad things after. I take the time to truly listen, to what they put on the table and what they have to say. And truthfully, I don't have a lot of, the bad problems that most leaders deal with or engage with, because I'm having those in the moment, just in time conversations to talk through performance. And it's rare that I forget or I can't speak to instances when I'm ready to write up their review, because in my organization, we do have a formal, narrative that we write up. And when I speak to this, where they killed it, they nailed it, oh my God, it was amazing, it was awesome. Or in some reviews, I have to say, hey, here's where I think we can step it up next year. I have it all. There's no surprise to them, right? That's one of the things that happens in performance reviews, right? they're not getting the feedback, so they're alarmed and they're surprised come that one-time review. Like, I had no idea my leader felt that way. I didn't know that was an issue. I've been, doing this all the time, every time, and it's a habit that's probably going to be harder to break. So again, communication, right, and performance is simple conversations, and then making sure to have time and space set aside to just review, what's been happening and how well he or she has been performing. And then, of course, we always have opportunities for improvement and making space to talk about those too on a frequent basis. So in essence, I'm kind of taking the millennials approach, to performance management.
Yeah, no, I think those are great tips. And it's not rocket science.
It's not.
The number of times I say that to students and organizational leaders, like, it's not rocket science. There's some basic principles. You can start to implement these consistently, and it'll make a world of difference.
Yeah.
And I was just going to share a quick example. I have a colleague, he out of college, his first big HR related role was with Goldman Sachs. A great opportunity, a great organization, and they do some pretty interesting things in terms of performance management, and it's quite complex, actually, but they follow some really great sound principles, and I'm not going to go into all those details, but the point was that's where he started. So his first professional experience was doing this super intense, comprehensive, year-long performance management type of process. And then he left Goldman after a few years, and he went to another large organization, and they had a different but similarly kind of formally structured process. Mm-hmm. And then after being there for several years, he went and was hired as an HR generalist, leading the whole HR area at a kind of a medium-sized business. And when he got there, his first inclination was, I'm going to duplicate and replicate what they did at Goldman, because that was a really cool process. But without thinking about the culture at this new organization or the appetite of current leadership towards these types of processes. And so for the first couple of months he was there, he was like banging his head against the wall, just trying to do all these complicated things. And finally he came to the realization that, wait a minute, I just need to simplify. So he simplified it down to really just a few basic questions, regular check-in coaching sessions. And he's, over the last couple of years he's been there, he's seen tremendous results in helping people really drive, not compliance-based performance management, but really performance management to drive performance, which is what yeah, exactly, which is what the actual intent is. So it's not rocket science. You don't have to do this super complex system. You just need to have consistent conversations. And when that can happen, then amazing things can happen. So.
No, I know, and I think that's a very, very good point. And it kind of speaks to the things that I see in partnering and working with my clients. Right, initially starting out, he leveraged like that a Me Too strategy. Let me take what I've learned from my past. And we all in the HR OD world, we know that culture is king. Right? You can have a phenomenal idea, a great idea, but culture will will actually eat it up and spit it out. If you're not really understanding the cultural climate, the current, and what works in this environment, right? And then where the organization is heading. So no, I think that's a great example. And in this day and age, with technology and all the things we have access to, and just even our attention span, right? We know that as the years progress, our attention span is shorter and shorter and shorter. So no one has time nor energy for complexity. All of us want things simple, right? Because even think about from our HR hat or our OD perspective, someone has to manage this complex program, right? So you want it simple for the people to execute on it, and you want it simple so that we can manage it well, right? And we see the results that we truly want, which is driving people performance.
Well, it has been a real pleasure talking with you this past half hour. time goes too quickly and we never have enough time to go into everything. But hopefully I can have you back at some point and we can talk more about some of these types of issues in the future.
It would be an honor. It would.
As we wrap up today, maybe you can just share with my listeners, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to learn more about you?
Absolutely. So I am always on LinkedIn. So that's a great place. Kaleh Raymond, as well as social media. You can follow me on @BeTheSpark. That's BETHE, and that's Spark with a C, SPARC. And those are probably the number two ways to kind of connect with me. As well as, of course, you can email me anytime, any questions. I love talking about HR, OD, people-centric programs, and helping organizations improve human connections and improve their business metrics as well. So that's Kaleh @BeTheSpark.com as well if you want to shoot me an email.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.
You too. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.